Hi everyone, I'm Huitema from Parliament's social media team, and I'm saying you hello again from Strasbourg. We're again live on Parliament's Facebook account and YouTube as well. And well, in order to achieve and deliver on its ambitious climate goals, the European Parliament last month backed the goal of European Commission to have zero emissions in the EU by 2035, and also revised the revised 2030 emissions in cars and vans. And of course, all this caused lots of comments and questions on our social media, because people are worried what will really happen to their cars, what will really happen in practice. And in order to help you understand, today we will have a discussion with a Parliament member who is the lead member on this topic, Huitema. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for agreeing to answer all these questions that we have.
Absolutely. I hope we can answer them.
And before we start, it's a reminder for everyone that this is also your chance to ask questions and comments, so please keep sending them in. I will monitor the conversation and will ask to our guest today within the next 30 or 40 minutes. Well, again, thank you for being here. And as I mentioned before, we received so many comments and questions on our social media. So maybe let's start with the one question from Instagram. And Arturo is saying, so the people will have to be forced by the European Parliament to which type of car to buy? What would you answer to such questions?
Well, I would answer that's not completely true, and also it's not new that we as Parliament and the European Union set criteria for cars. So, for example, we have safety criteria, the seat belts and things like this, but also already long time ago, we decided that cars should perform in a certain way on CO2 emissions, and that cars should reduce their CO2 emissions, well, basically every year. And that's what we're doing now as well. And, well, not only the European Parliament, but all the member states, and I think also in the world, we have said the Paris Agreement is important. We want, as the European Union, in 2050, we want to be climate neutral as the first continent in the world. I think a lot of people endorse this. So do I, because I'm concerned about the climate as well. But that means that all the different sectors have to be climate neutral too, and also transport sector. And the transport sector is still one of the major CO2 emitters that we have in the European Union, around 20% still. If you consider that the lifespan of an average car is 15 years, you have to start in 2035. And we're not saying what kind of techniques you have to use. We're only saying that from 2035, new cars cannot emit CO2 anymore. With what kind of techniques you are doing this, yeah, that's all up to the car manufacturers. But we're saying if you place on the market a new car, it has to be zero emission, so it cannot emit any CO2 anymore. This also means that there is no influence of effect on existing cars. So if you buy now a new car, you can drive it until the end of the lifespan. If it still runs in 2050, good job.
Very good. Well, you actually mentioned that transport is the big polluter, the biggest polluter still of CO2 emissions, and cars, actually passenger cars, they account for 61% of CO2 emissions in EU road transport. So how can this be effectively achieved by 2035? What does this goal entail?
So it doesn't mean that in 2035 all the passenger cars on the road have to be zero emission. No. Our goal is that in 2050, basically all the cars are CO2 neutral. And like I said, if you want to achieve that in 2050, you have to start in 2035 with new cars, because the lifespan is around 15 years. So new cars cannot emit CO2 anymore. And for the existing fleet, yeah, that's another legislation that is now discussed here, especially Germany really wants this, is to have a CO2 tax for car driving. So basically you have the European trading system for industries. They want to extend this, for example, also to road transport, trucks, but also passenger cars. And that means that the car driver has to pay CO2 tax. And I always said it, okay, you can do this, but you have to provide also a climate-friendly alternative. I don't want that car drivers have to pay and they don't have an alternative. So this file that I'm doing, the CO2 performance for cars, saying that from 2035 all the new cars should be zero emission, is an alternative to avoid the CO2 tax, of course.
And so about what kind of types of cars we're actually talking here? Is it just petrol, diesel cars, what will be really sort of abandoned from 2035?
So it's not really that we are saying you have to abandon, for example, the combustion engines, but it's very difficult with the combustion engine to have zero emission at the end of the tailpipe of a car. In theory, if you find a solution with a combustion engine, feel free to do it, but the car in itself cannot emit any CO2 anymore. So, for example, there are discussions if it would be possible to combust hydrogen in a combustion engine, but still then you might end up with some small CO2 emissions because of lubricants that are being burned, or maybe NOx that is produced because of the heat of the engine. These kind of things, it's still under negotiations. But what I can say is, but it's not only for cars, in future we will find a shift away from fossil fuels anyway. That's in industry, it's for households, but it's also for road transport, even for trucks, tractors, aviation as well. And if you ask me what would be the most viable option for passenger cars, I do believe that more what the market will uptake is battery electric vehicles, because you see already now that electricity prices compared to petrol prices is already beneficial to drive a car on electricity. Also, the maintenance cost from battery electric car is much lower because it's a super simple technique. The only thing, and that's also why I'm so motivated for this file, is the high purchasing price of electric cars, for example. And with this file, we try to tend to find competition among car manufacturers, and also like saying that all the research and development that they have, put it in, for example, the zero-emission cars like battery electric, that the purchasing prices go down and that there is a beneficial for the car driver. That is one of the main motivations for me for this file.
Well, we will still come back talking about the electric cars, but maybe before that, you already briefly mentioned what's going to happen to old cars, but this is really a concern for people. So I may just read few questions from here. Mr. Smallbice from Instagram is saying, what are your plans for car enthusiasts who still want to drive their old timers? These cars are not already produced and it's not sustainable to scrap them. And Valbone from Facebook is saying, now these cars will be exported to poor countries. This is not a way for climate change, and if not, COVID-19 has taught us this lesson. So is there a risk that those cars will end up?
I think this is a major misunderstanding, but because this file is not touching upon existing cars at all. Like I said, if you buy now a new car or you have an old-timer, you can drive it as long as you want. That's not a problem. We will not enforce you that you have to retrofit it with an electric motor or whatever. Not at all. So if you buy a car now, it doesn't is not affected by this. What I do see is that, for example, the fuel prices will go up in future. So the fossil fuel prices will go up. We have also in the European Union already a ban on Russian gas and oil. That's what we want to do in 2027. We want to get rid of this, and basically later on we would like to see that there is a complete phase out of fossil fuels, not only for cars but for the industry, households and so on. So you will see that the price of fossil fuels, petrol and diesel, will increase. And also, if you want to find an alternative for diesel and petrol, it's the so-called e-fuels, so the synthetic fuels that you from electricity you make first hydrogen, and with that hydrogen you make synthetic petrol or synthetic diesel. But it will cost a lot of electricity to do so. So in a comparison, if you drive one car, for example, an old-timer with e-fuels, you can drive 5 electric cars on this. So also that means that the price of an e-fuel could be around 5 times higher than just the electricity price. So it is possible, but it will be in the future, I think, cheaper to drive electric.
Well, Parliament also asked European Commission to sort of assess the impact on consumers and employment by 2025, because we see that many people are really concerned about, the rising cost of living, the impact on the car industry, on job losses, and simply being able not to afford it. Yes. So, for example, Andres from Instagram is saying, I hope you are aware of the fact that you decided to destroy Europe's most important market. So many people will lose their jobs, a big gift to China. Or Ricky from LinkedIn is saying, this will cause a great loss for European GDP, rising unemployment and huge problems for the European people. Franca from Facebook is saying, with this economic situation, I have no more money to buy any kind of car. And Edgar, again from Facebook, is saying replacements of internal combustion vehicles, electric ones, will come at citizens' own expense, where all the extra electric power will come. So you see many different concerns
Many
as well.
different questions. Maybe first on the consumer, because I've always seen that it's the most important stakeholder, and that's most of my concern. And you already see that in some countries, the total cost of ownership, it's called. So it's like driving so it's the cost of the fuel, the maintenance cost, and the purchasing price. That altogether is the total cost of ownership, and also insurance and things like this. For example, battery electric driving, it's the same or even cheaper already now than driving your car on a petrol car. Like I said, the fuel that you're using, electricity, in comparison is already much cheaper than, for example, petrol. But the high purchasing prices, that is still the problem. But you see already in the last couple of 10 years that the price of electric cars have gone down already. And that will continue in future. So I do believe that at some point there is not so much of a difference of the purchasing price of a petrol car and an electric car. However, what is the main issue? A lot of people don't buy a new car. They want to buy a second-hand car or a third-hand. And that market is not there yet. So that's why this legislation is also enforcing that there is more competition. Also, all the car manufacturers have to, in their whole portfolio, have to go for example, battery electric cars or hydrogen zero-emission cars, and that you sooner get the second-hand, third-hand market. And also being said at this moment with inflation, with the Ukraine war, also petrol cars at the moment are super expensive at the moment. No car manufacturer is giving a discount on cars anymore because simply the demand is too high for this. So it's not really a fair comparison to say, hey, the electric cars are so expensive. Yes, it's true. So does petrol cars. And that's why we are going for this legislation, that we give certainty for car manufacturers, that all the R&D is going, for example, in electric cars. And there's more competition, and we get a sooner a second-hand or third-hand market.
So overall, cars is expensive. We can also say it like that.
But I do see if we are not careful, and we, for example, a CO2 tax is kicking in, European CO2 price is kicking in, if we don't giving certainty for car manufacturers what is the direction that we want, then it will be much more expensive, and then you end up, for example, with a car with a combustion engine with fuels that you have to run your car on that are super expensive. And then we said, maybe it would have been smarter to use the electricity and to plug in directly your car to the electricity grid, because electricity will be much cheaper. And yeah, that's another package that the European Union is really looking for, to find renewable energy sources, electricity sources, because it doesn't make any sense to have a coal-fired power plant and then that is making electricity and you run your car on basically coal electricity. That doesn't make any sense, of course.
True. But simply, is it feasible? Because Marcelo from Facebook is saying an ambitious decision is not necessarily a right decision. Betting everything on electric is a big mistake, because on the industrial side it involves a revolution that cannot be implemented in so few years and with enormous social costs. So do we have enough, do you think it's enough time until?
The market will be faster than this legislation kicks in. So to give some examples, for example, in Germany, Audi already says that all the Audi cars, new cars, will be electric in 2026. Mercedes, 2030. Volkswagen, the whole Volkswagen group, 2035. Volvo, Ford, and others, the same. Everybody agrees that the tendency is already going mainly to battery electric vehicle. Not even hydrogen cars, because they see that first, if you want to run your cars on hydrogen, fuel cell cars, for example, you have to make from electricity first the step to hydrogen, and you will lose around 50% of the energy there. So hydrogen is twice as expensive. And then people say, okay, but I do see a future of e-fuels. And then why, after 2035, why then not also give the possibility to sell combustion engines that can run then on e-fuels? Well, that would be even more expensive. Then you have to make from hydrogen e-fuels. And like I said, one car that is driving on e-fuels, you can run 5 battery electric cars. So it's for a reason that all the car manufacturers are also not even investing in hydrogen cars. It's all battery electric, and that's not because we are saying this with legislation, it's pure the market that are doing so, because the total cost of ownership are simply more efficient, more than with the battery electric car than for the e-fuels thing. One element that we didn't discuss but was a question is the employers and the whole transition. And that is of course true. And that you see that happening already. Like I said, basically all the car manufacturers are already going to battery electric cars. And especially the suppliers, so the especially small companies that are, for example, supplying parts for combustion engine or gearboxes, their market will change dramatically. And no matter what we will do here, even if we don't have this legislation, that will happen. Everybody agrees on this. So what I try to do here as a rapporteur in the European Parliament, to highlight this social dimension and also try to find possibilities for maybe funding or re-education, and try to, if people see a job loss, that they can work somewhere else. Because the demand for people that are working in technical sectors, so practical sectors, is huge. We have a huge shortage of engineers, people working in techniques, things like this. And a lot has to be done. We have to have windmills, solar panels, maybe even nuclear energy. Those people, for this transition to go to a climate neutral European Union, we really, really need those people.
So they will easily find jobs elsewhere.
Yes, but the only thing is, of course, and I understand, people love to work in their job. And for example, also Audi. Audi in Brussels, they transformed their factory to completely battery electric cars. They have done it in a way that all the employees can still work on that plant, but of course not making petrol cars anymore, but electric cars. So it can be done, and we try to help them from the European Union to do so as well.
Okay. Well, what about the other sectors? Because, well, passenger cars are the main polluter, but with the legislation we'll also focus on other means of transport and transport modes. And indeed, Albert from LinkedIn is asking, but has EU made it compulsory for power generation stations, ships, airplanes and heavy machinery to have zero emissions? So what about the other sectors?
And that is very difficult to do. So, for example, if you have an airplane, there are still some prototypes, but if you have a Boeing 777, full electric, then you need a lot of batteries, that the airplane will be super heavy, that it cannot even take off. So you have to find other solutions, and especially for aviation, shipping, but also, for example, fishing vessels or tractors in agriculture or heavy-duty trucks. Then the solution might be not battery electric, but, for example, hydrogen, or maybe even that e-fuels. But then you have, of course, the same downside with e-fuels, that they are very expensive fuels. And that's also one of the reasons that I'm saying, okay, save the e-fuels then for those transport modes that cannot be battery equipped. And try not to spend the e-fuels then on passenger cars, because ships, aviation, heavy-duty trucks need them so badly.
And the batteries, we talked a lot about the batteries. What about the batteries waste? Because, well, to calculate the CO2 emitted, not only we consider the emissions during the use, but also during the production process. And it's environmentally damaging, as we know, the batteries, and this is something that EU is also addressing as the problem. And Jose, in the meantime, from Facebook has a question saying electric and hybrid car will be dangerous waste in less than 10 years because the batteries are very toxic. Same as Fentia Marius from Facebook is saying, the craziest decision ever, as long as there is no clear technical breakthrough. Still, there is a lot to be developed in electrical cars, and they are still making CO2 footprint in the place where electricity is produced. What about electric batteries when they reach the end of life?
So that is why that you cannot solve everything in just one legislation. This legislation is only the CO2 performance standards for cars. But next to that, you have a package of maybe even 14 different pieces of legislation. So one, for example, is the Renewable Energy Directive, saying that, okay, if you have electricity and the car is driving on electricity, you have to make sure that it's green, so that it's renewable, for example, solar, wind, and I think even nuclear. The same applies to the battery. We are working on a new battery legislation. So taking into account that the production of a battery should be CO2 neutral, that it cannot have adverse effects on the environment, and also that we are recycling the batteries, and that we're also thinking about the dependency of the resources that are necessary for batteries. So, for example, now with the Ukraine war, nickel prices are sky high. Most of the old electric cars are using lithium, nickel, cobalt. Cobalt is also a difficult one in, for example, Congo mines. And now you see already alternatives in innovation. So Tesla is now making a lithium phosphate iron batteries. So phosphates are they're everywhere. Iron is there as well. Lithium, we also have lithium mines in the European Union. So that battery regulation is super important. And you see already, like I said, a lot of innovation in batteries, because batteries are not needed only for passenger cars, but we need it for the whole society, basically. So you see that if smart people find a new kind of battery, they will be super rich, so to say. So it will be really a breakthrough. So there's a lot of focus on innovation in batteries.
So what about like simple equipment? Because it's something also missing, as Maxime also pointed out, like would be great to have at least one charger in every parking spot, because it's true that people now experience not finding those charging spots wherever they want, or they cannot go long distances. They say it's only for the transport inside the city.
So you have basically three elements there. So for example, the range is being extended all over the years, and new models are coming, and basically all car manufacturers are working on a car that have a range of 600 kilometers plus. Tesla has already those cars, Mercedes, and all others are working on this. So the range will be extended. Second is efficiency. So there's a very nice startup in the Netherlands. It's called Lightyear. They have a super high efficiency that you don't have to charge your car every time. And if you want to charge it, you can plug it in on just the 220 socket and not a fast charging, because it's enough. The battery is small because the efficiency is so high. And thirdly, and that's another package in that whole broad package of 14 proposals, that's the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation. So we as European Union do see, okay, this is the direction where it goes. The market is already directing towards battery electric cars. A lot of concern is there for consumers, can I recharge? Can I charge my car? So this legislation is indeed focusing public infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and also make it possible that market parties, for example, Tesla has charging facilities, Ionic. So the market is trying to invest in charging infrastructure as well, that we make it possible that it's happening. And yeah, basically it's a little bit of chicken of an egg. And well, I provide the chicken with this CO2 performance standards, and the egg is coming in another legislation, and you see a lot of investments going there already.
Well, what about alternative ways? Car sharing, public transport, cycling, walking could also help to reduce emissions. Like, which other alternatives would you suggest? Daniela from Facebook is also saying, well done. We must say that the shift to electric mobility must come together with a lower number of cars. So public transport, bikes, sharing must be implemented.
You see that happening now, and you see also a shift, especially with my generation, maybe younger generation. They are more in the so-called lease society, lease economy. That's why should you own it? Is the car a status symbol? Why can't you not share it? And there's nothing wrong with this, but well we are not touching this in this file. For me it was important to also highlight that, especially in rural areas and maybe people with jobs that really do need a car. And I found it unfair that people that are basically, because of the job or because they are live in a remote area, that we are punishing them with a CO2 tax on basically car driving. That's something that I didn't want to do. I want to make car driving still being affordable for the daily person, of the everyday persons, to make it affordable. And I do see that with this legislation we can reduce the purchasing price, for example, for battery electric cars, and that car driving can still be affordable, and that you are not, for example, locked in, and that you can only buy high cost e-fuels that cost maybe 5 times more than electricity.
Parliament will enter now the negotiations with the EU member states, so it's also for people to understand that it's not something already set in stone. And so what, in your opinions, will be the main challenges? Do you see differences between the Nordic countries, southern countries, where maybe in the north they're more used to electric cars already, or like, so what are the challenges that you see?
I think 2035 is a year that most of the member states can agree on, also taking into account if you really want to have a climate-neutral transport sector in 2050, you have to start in 2035. I think one of the elements that you see a big the vision, how you say, differentiation, is indeed the charging infrastructure. For example, in my country, it's there already for a large part, but maybe in the new member states, eastern member states, it's still a big challenge. And so, we will have to focus on that. That we can assure that there is a charging infrastructure as well.
It actually is sort of similar question that we just received from James, who's saying, what about car-centric countries that are traditionally slow to adapt and do little to promote alternative modes like Malta? So that's
the thing, and also it's super important that we have a second and third hand or fourth hand market also for those countries. But even in my country, a lot of people don't buy a new car, but in some other countries they are really dependent on the second hand or third hand market. So that's why it would be unfair. It would be really unfair if only rich people can afford, for example, a battery electric car and have a lower total cost of ownership that they can drive very cheap. And more the poorer people, they are still stuck with a combustion or a petrol car with skyrocket high petrol prices. I think that is super unfair. So we have to make sure that, for example, battery electric car driving is possible for everybody and not only for the rich people.
Well, maybe one last question from the audience that we just received. Anna is asking, what is the EU doing to get the rest of the world to get with the program, basically?
You mean,
how can we take all the world to follow the lead?
Basically, it's already happening. So China is very much was mentioned there already, is investing. Great Britain is already going in 2030 in this, so much earlier than the European Union. The US is focusing on this. And it's not only because of legislation, but also the tendency of the whole market that it's going to that direction. Not only because it's more cost efficient, but you should also not underestimate the gadget factor. Like especially the younger generation wants to have the latest models, like you have for iPhones and Android, Samsung phones. That will apply as well for cars. People want to be part of the future and not lagging behind. And that's not only in the European Union, that's all around the world.
Well, it's about half an hour. We actually finished with most of our questions, of which I'm sure many of them might still be raised. And we did receive some comments which were more negative and then some more positive. So let me read you one from Dario from Facebook, who's saying, seems so many people doesn't understand that we need to cut emissions or we face the painful extinction. We already wasted at least 40 years doing nothing, and now we must run to do all at the same time. Will be hard, will demand we work together to change our habits, but alternative is so much worse that we must do anything we can. So do you agree with that, Rio?
Yes, and if you really look to it in a broader perspective, indeed we have to do something on climate change. A lot of people are worried about climate change. And a lot of people do believe that we have to act now, and not only the whole world basically, because they agreed with the Paris Agreement, and I think that is an important piece of agreement, of course. And with all the climate measures that you can take for all the different industries, but also households and what is affected by yourself, then this file is the most cheapest one, most easiest one to do, because I fairly believe that this is not increasing, for example, taxes, or is increasing the financial burden of the voters. No, it could very well be reducing it. While for other climate measures, it will get an extra financial burden that has to be. Consumers and voters will get an extra financial burden because of the climate measures that we will have to take in order to get the Paris Agreement.
Well, thank you very much. I think it was very useful. We hope that you answered all the questions, and I'm sure maybe in the future we'll have more interviews like that to see how this legislation will go, or if it will be at some point implemented. So thank you again.
More than welcome.
And good luck with your work.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the watchers and followers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Integration into world market.